hope everybody had fun. And I hope for those who've been at Universe, you also had a great day. My name is Simina Pasat. I'm a VP of Product at GitHub. I work on Copilot things and product partnerships. And I've been working on MCP-related things as well in the past year. And I'm joined by an incredible lineup. I've heard so many things about many of you in the past month, so I'm thrilled to meet you in person finally. So I'll go through quick intros, and then we have lots of questions for you. So I will start with Dan. Dan is a security principal product engineer at Microsoft, and you're a core maintainer of MCP. We have, if I say anything wrong, please correct me.
Nope, that covers it. Yep.
Great. David from Anthropic, member of technical staff and co-creator and lead maintainer of MCP. I think many of us, when they think about MCP, they think about you. Then we have Nick Cooper from OpenAI, member of technical staff and also core maintainer of MCP. And Jeremiah, founder and CEO at Prefect, and also maintainer of FastMCP, which is a very popular framework for building MCP server and clients. Welcome, and thanks for being here. Awesome. So I think somebody said before, we're almost at the 1-year anniversary of MCP. So going back in time a little bit, just maybe like a quick reminder of what is MCP and what problem does it actually solve in the AI ecosystem today, and how did we get here? How did we get to have this protocol?
Yeah, so MCP, I think in my mind, it most importantly solves taking an application that uses an LLM of any type of form and connect us with a data source that provides additional data to help you solve a specific task, or take action on behalf of you in order to solve that task. And that is a very generic approach to the problem, because that context source could be an agent. It can be a fairly simplistic, shaped MCP server. Yeah, and so that's really what this is. For me, it solves the n times m problem of I take an application, I need some form of context source, and I need to connect them in one form or shape. It's just as simple as that, really.
Great. And how did we get here? How did you get to have an open protocol and not something that only Anthropic would use, let's say?
Yeah, I think the way we got there is that MCP originally started to try to solve an internal problem that we had of having multiple of these clients, be it IDEs, be it Cloud Desktop at the time, and wanting to connect our own data sources. And so we had this type of n times m problem. And so I went to Justin and mentioned, I feel this should be a protocol. He liked the idea. We built something internally. And at that point, we felt we got some good adoption internally, got people to really get excited about it. And then I think why it's open source, you can make up a great strategy for why Anthropic would want to make it open source, but the reality is that Justin and I are very old school open source maintainers and just love open source and feel like the only way to make something like this work is as a true open source project. And I think later when we talk about open source and other aspects, I think it's pretty clear that it's a fairly old school approach to the problem. And so we just went to our chief product officer and said we want to open source this, and he didn't stop us. And I guess that's where we are. And that's here we are. It's really that simple,
Love it. We saw a very similar problem at GitHub. We didn't have the same solution, and MCP has been doing much better. Awesome. So I'm curious. You mentioned a little bit open source. I think that's a foundational thing for the model context protocol, and each and every single one of you has some story with your contribution to MCP. But I'm curious, explain a little bit how the steering committee works and how the collaboration with the whole community works around MCP.
Continually evolving, I think, is the best thing. The most exciting thing about being open source is everything we're doing here is new. AI models are new, Agentic AI is new, the systems they interact with are new, and the community sort of has really rallied around MCP. And in terms of the steering committee, we're really here to help distill and work out themes from that community. So we have a sort of funnel approach of like, there's the Discord and open forums on GitHub issues and discussions that then become like working groups, that then become lead maintainers, and then the core maintainers. And really it's just, I think it's working very effectively in trying to discern the signal from all the interesting things out there of what the most high priority parts are for the protocol. Like for me, one of the things that I think we've been thinking most thoughtfully on is around authentication and all the improvements there that we've had over the past 6 months.
Yeah, and this is actually a good example of just how MCP and the power of the open source community come together, is because when, like, one of the things we did earlier this year is look at the authentication stack for Model Context Protocol, and we reached out to David and team and said, hey, like, we want to contribute, are you okay with this? And they said yes, and we got a bunch of people from the community. Like, it's not just one person or two people doing this. There's a bunch of security experts that plugged in, we chugged along, we kind of iterated on it, got it into the state that it is, and it got merged into the spec, right? And this is how we see it working moving forward as well. And this is all about the community. It's all open source, right? And there's, of course, more things coming in where folks are trying to extend the protocol. They want to add more things to it. And even from a governance perspective, like, it's a fairly young process. Like, the protocol itself is less than a year old, and the governance, like, when did we formalize it? A couple months back? June? Yeah, so
June, yeah.
4 months in, right? And we're still learning, and there's a lot of things that we're doing, but it's all about the community.
That's great. And then I know you're from Microsoft, which you know, maybe for some it's a bit unusual. There's a lot of big companies contributing to MCP and being either part of the steering committee or very, very vocal and like putting a lot of work in it. I'm curious if you can go a little bit deeper here on like why is Microsoft contributing, and also why there's so many other you know, big tech companies contributing.
I think it all comes back to the fact that, as Amanda called out earlier, that there is a lot of traction behind MCP. There's a community behind it. There's no point in us coming in and reinventing the wheel. There's no point for us coming in and coming up with our own thing when there is a huge pull behind what the community actually wants. And this is kind of the MO that Anthropic has established with MCP, and I think it's a very repeatable process where we see this as kind of the model, pun intended, for how this should actually work, right? Like, you're establishing this foundation that others can use, and we've seen this at Microsoft before. Like, we're no stranger to open source. We've done this with, like, at GitHub extensively. So why not do this here as well? And I think it worked really well, and even within Microsoft, like, when MCP was in its early days, and I say early days, like, what, a few months back, like, this feels like forever. But like, we literally had a whole crew of people across the company that we're thinking about how can we plug in MCP in the right places, and what are the things that the community cares about and the product cares about, and what's that overlap, and how we can just run forward with it. So we know we need to move fast, and again, open source allows us to do that.
It was a bit similar at GitHub as well, when we also had our MCP server. It was similarly, I think, April last year, if I remember correctly, and it just took off immediately, and it was open source, and people loved it.
Right, and even from within Microsoft, like, we have Toby here, who's been working on, like, the registry, and like there's contributors that are actually putting in a lot of time and effort to make this really a thoughtful, community-driven open source project, right?
Jeremiah, I'm curious, you have a little bit of a different role as well, where you're a maintainer of a framework that kind of comes on top of MCP, or like helping people. Can you talk a little bit about that and your experience here?
Yeah, of course. I'm only on the stage because it's open source. And the advantage that gives me is I am not actually concerned with all of the specifics of the protocol, even if I know them in and out, because folks like yourselves are making sure that it works, and I get to go and try and make sure that this reaches folks in a higher level, in an application stack that's as easy as possible to deploy, although of course it's opinionated, as all high-level software should be. And so that, I mean, very viscerally for me, has been the win of it being open source, is this opportunity to contribute and interact and collaborate with folks such as yourselves, while also trying to foster this community of folks who I'm not sure would be able to get as much out of the low-level protocol as they can when they're accessing it through a more opinionated interface. And so that balance has been really exciting to cultivate and explore and figure out what is that balance, and that it's such a young protocol, and that's an open conversation that's been a lot of fun.
And we get to steal all the good stuff he's doing back, which is, I really appreciate that.
We've blurred the lines a little bit.
And it's not just you. Like, we've been talking to folks at Microsoft just last week, and somebody was asking, like, what do if I use MCP with Python, what do I do? It's like, FastMCP, duh.
Yeah.
Like
He did the first version. I was like, this is good. Just copy it
it's
over.
really
and
good.
Call it done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you're working on FastMCP. When you find maybe like a little gap or something that doesn't work as smooth as you would like it to be, do you go to them and ask them for something? Do you fix it yourself?
No,
tell us how it works in the background.
I never bug the committee at that. That's not the right. That would be an abuse of a relationship. We
You
open
should.
issues. I should? Okay, well, you all heard it. We open issues like anybody else. If we're not convinced it's a protocol concern, and many things are not a protocol concern, then we work around it in framework. And if and when the protocol decides to have a resolution, then we'll adopt that. And that's the challenge we take on.
I'll just give a shout out. Like, Jeremiah is underselling just the amount of work that he's doing, because recently we had some security conversations, and I was like pinging him on Discord. I was like, hey, have you seen this? Like, within an hour, he had a PR. Like, this is the kind of level of support you're getting from FastMCP. So shout out to Jeremiah and team.
I told him something in the morning I want to see in FastMCP, and I think it's already in.
Yeah.
We merged it earlier.
It is that good. Like, again, this is a FastMCP song session.
But isn't that like that is what's happening? It's not Meme who's moving fast. The whole space is moving fast. Frankly, if we didn't do that, we would lose. That's what it takes, and I think that's why it's winning.
I would say as well, it's one of the earliest signs to me of like how healthy this community was, which is like you see other protocols come out and it's like a whole packaged thing. Like, here's servers and clients and examples and references and all this sort of stuff. MCP is evolving very much in front of everyone, and it's very exciting to see all these tools be developed alongside the specification, independently of it, and they sort of feed off each other in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you said something really interesting there, that not everything is a protocol issue. There might be something that you have to solve. I think many people here are in a similar situation where they might want something from MCP that is not doing right now. How do you, like, on the steering committee and in community, how do you decide if something is a problem of the protocol that you should address versus something that not your problem?
I think in general there are some principles in my mind that I have, and I'm promising people to write down since 6 months, and I'm not doing it. And with that, I like select or have the luck to work with people like Dan and Nick that I feel share a very similar design way, and it's something I'm looking forward and like having in the steering committee. And I think that is just like allows us to look at this and say, within the principles, is this like, does this make sense as a change to the protocol? Is this an SDK change, or is this something that like a higher level thing should fix? And I think we have the principles quite well in our minds, such that there's very little conversation there, and we very often just agree on this. And then, you know, we're trying to be as nice as possible to tell people that we believe that this might be live somewhere else, and have luckily also like a wide variety outside the core maintainers of maintainers and community managers that help, like, you know, redirecting people's like well-meant effort into ways where it might actually land before it, like, you know, goes all the way up until like the steering committee, and then we just say no. And so for us, it's just a matter of like building a common philosophy of like how we want to design this and like communicate it in the best possible way. And I think we're slowly getting there.
Yeah, I'd say that, like, for me, the analogy earlier of TCP was sort of an interesting one. Like, there is a alternate bizarro world where everything TCP needed to do was built into TCP. Like, why have HTTP? Let's push it all down. And like there's sort of complex balance here as to the priorities of things to let TCP grow and evolve and, like, I guess ultimately get replaced with Quick on UDP. But all these things need to evolve at different levels, and there's a bit of taste in it, and I do feel very aligned with the principles we have as a committee. At the end of the day, the thing that actually I use to prioritize is how many times people from the community have come back with the same problem. Like the obvious problems and where it needs focus usually is extremely visible in community discussion. Like there's the one-off question versus the every week or every day question.
Yeah, and I think there's also a good degree of maintaining the simplicity of the protocol, right? Because a lot of people have a lot of things they want to do. And I mean, we've seen this with like auth as a good example. It's a super complex topic. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody has a specific need, but you can't just bloat the protocol with everybody's requirements. So you have to establish a kind of min bar and then a process for like what we're talking about, like extensions, right? Of just like, hey, if you have a company that works in like healthcare and has very specific needs, how do you extend it without putting it into the core protocol? Because the core protocol establishes this kind of the minimum bar, the minimum common denominator, basically.
Sorry.
Yeah, we also just look often to like other projects and like how have they done this in the past. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. And I think it's super important to not believe that you know better than everybody else and just like, no, there's history and there's a lot to like learning from history and there's a lot to like reaching out to people who have done this in the past. And I'd like my fair share of like luck to being able to talk, for example, to Brendan Burns of Kubernetes and even Guido on Python. And just like, how do you do some of these things? And I think that helps a great deal to just try to learn and try to not make the same mistakes again. And I think that's at least part of what we're trying to do here.
I just want to offer one thought, maybe as an outsider, which is experience has made me a little bit skeptical of open source committees. I don't know if that's a hot take or not. But having seen how David is leading this committee and having such a firm hand on the rudder, I strongly believe that every product needs an opinion as its backbone. And here the product is the protocol. And I learned that it makes David very upset when people come up and thank him for MCP. So nobody say thank you, David, for MCP at any time today, please. Sorry, David. But we really should all be grateful that there is someone who cares to really adhere to what this is supposed to do, because it, frankly, with the attention that's on it and the hype, this would be a bloated mess that would be unusable by anyone, if not for that sort of quiet leadership. So I really appreciate that.
I'd like to say, actually, following on that, it is like David on the steering committee. Like, so one of the inspirations for the MCP governance was based on PyTorch, I think.
Yeah, and a one-to-one copy.
Yeah.
Copy the page over.
I didn't know that. But one of the things I really love about it, though, is it's individuals. Like, it's about people who are committed to the protocol, its principles, and its intent in driving it forward. Like, it's not, like, there's another world where it's like the protocol's steered by an open source committee of Microsoft, Anthropic, and that. But there's names to these people. We all, like, truly believe in this protocol and where it can go. And that makes a significant difference to how effective I think the steering committee's become.
It's amazing, love it. So I think we have a pretty technical audience, so maybe we can get a little bit into the specifics. Can you give an example of maybe like an architectural challenge or a challenge that came up over the time and how you work together as an open source community and a steering committee to fix it? I think, Dan, you touched a bit on OAuth, but maybe there's...
Yeah, I think I start and then you can I think so I wrote the first specification in auth and I completely fucked it up. And, well, mostly. And not completely, but it was jokingly to say, like, I didn't get it right. And I got lucky that I think that then people from the community, from big identity providers, people like Dan, stepped up and really worked even until now on through this and helping to both educate me in how to do certain things in enterprises correctly, but also just guiding the design decisions and allowing us to go no, there's a group of people I can trust to get this right, and then just delegate for the most part there, right? And I think maybe there's a bit more nuance of how the decisions are actually done in your side, but they seem to do the right thing, and as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and this is yet another example where we lean very heavily on the community, right? Because auth is a complex topic. I can't claim that I'm an expert at all, right? Because there's people that know more than me. And like we talked to like Aaron Parecki, who works at Okta, he's an expert in all. He actually submits like RFCs to IETF. And we're like, this guy knows what he's talking about. So let's talk to him about Okta, right? But also to just show you how the protocol evolves with customer needs is like one of the things that even like David was talking about like fucking things up, but like we've done that with DCR. When we release like the new spec, like we worked through it and then like, oh, that does not work quite well. And so then we work with Aaron and like Paul and the Anthropic team to go in and say like, okay, we actually need to change this. And there's this new thing called the client ID metadata documents. And this is actually much better and a smoother experience. And so we reviewed that, we went through the process, and it's now going to be accepted in the spec, right? So we recognize the fact that some of the decisions are not going to be perfect. That's okay. But we also have a path to basically evolve this without breaking the past.
Love it. So looking at MCP, it's a foundation for the future. So I'm curious if there's any blocks of MCP that you see becoming like a foundation for agentic AI in the future.
Like any blockers, you mean, like anything?
No, like components, blocks.
The biggest building block I'm excited about is asynchronous tool calling or long-running tasks or something to that effect. There's lots of different ways to model it. Because right now for MCP, it's an active client and an active server, both actively connected. And I think we really need to break that to unlock quite a few new opportunities. And that's the most exciting. That's actually part of the upcoming focus for the next like major spec revision, will be something in this sort of theme.
My team's extremely excited about that. Dave and I were talking about it earlier. Prefect's a workflow orchestration company. Like all we know is tasks and durability and governing them. And they were so excited that this is going to be part of the spec. I think it's going to be fantastic. I think for me, one of the most exciting things is not a component of MCP at all, but it's for people to start to view MCP. People talk a lot about MCP as if it is an agent. They talk about like agentic and AI outcomes, and they say the MCP is going to do it. And I think you get much better outcomes if you view the server as like this programmatic, stable island of non-agentic code as a waypoint in a non-deterministic agentic journey. It is a place where you can actually exercise like real control and real governance in a way that we haven't solved for in agents broadly. And when you start to think about it that way and design MCP products in a way that sort of recognizes that place, you actually get way more powerful outcomes than just like regurgitating a REST API or an endpoint that's just going to be called once. And so there's a design aspect to MCP that I think we're evolving now as a community, which I'm really excited about, because even the same basic MCP components, I think when remixed in this way, you get just greater outcomes.
So you said something really interesting there. I mean, you said many interesting things, but something stood out on how MCP is not just regurgitating an API. So I'm wondering if you have any maybe tips and tricks for members of the audience who are working on their MCP server or who have an MCP server, how to develop it, not to just regurgitate an API, let's say.
Yeah, I do. I have a few things that I think I'm very excited about that I don't see people do, and it's quite surprising to me that they don't do it, to be frank. But because, like, I think one of the realizations, like, MCP is very, very basic, and it's like building blocks. This is why it works so well, because I think, or why people use it so well, because it is very composable in ways, but it gives a lot of freedom to the client implementers to do smart things. I think one of these examples is, I guess, however you want to phrase it, you can call it programmatic or whatever it might be, but it's like this idea of using just, for example, generating code blocks that then call MCP tools, so you get more parallelism out of it, you get composability out of it. And I'm like, I think we have seen this fairly early, but I think it has taken a long time in a Cloudflare blog post to make it really like widely spread as a concept. And I think there are similar aspects that I feel people are currently not doing. They're like, a good example is people complain MCP leads to context bloat because most clients just take the list of tools, shove it into the context window, and are very surprised that suddenly the context window is very big. But I do think, that there are mechanisms like discovery and search and other things you can do in advance and things we have learned and just need to reapply. Like instead of selecting context, maybe you want to select tools, and there's a bunch of things that you can do in this space that I feel people are not exploring to the extent, and I think you can really be very distinct. The third one, and then I'm out of ideas, is like, for example, people don't realize that what resources effectively do are providing you a remote file system. And if you think about it that way, and you think about models that can create code really well, models, it turns out, are also really good at creating code that interacts with file systems. And if you put these things together and experiment a lot, I think you can get a lot of very nice, powerful patterns that solve a lot of the complaints that people have, because I don't necessarily believe the simplicity of the protocol under it are there to like have to fix that, but the clients can already fix them.
Yeah, like Dave and I have talked about this a lot. Like composability and indirection are sort of two very related things to me, which is like, yes, there is a server and there is a client, and this is the interaction of MCP, but one person's server is another person's client. Like you can layer these things, you can compose them. We see a lot of this today in patterns like a registry or MCP API gateways, but most of those act for like auditability or control or authorization, something like this. There's so much opportunity here that we get to see of like, what if your gateway had a model in it that tunes things as it goes through, simplifies context, makes resources into something else. There's a lot of composable options here with these really simple building blocks. I'm super excited to see what people can do with this.
Yep. I think you can start with something like a semantic router as like the 101 version of that. And one pattern that I've been seeing more and more, and I just want to desperately lean into, is what we're calling a curator agent that actually can live on the MCP server. And the idea is it knows how to use it better than any client. And so rather than infect the client and try to convince it to become an expert in the MCP server, we have it talk to the curator like you would ask a librarian to help you find a book. And there's a lot of problems with just deploying that naively, but I'm really excited about some of these patterns.
Yeah, there's one in particular that a very common thing that comes up with about context selection is sort of RAG sort of things, like I want to do retrieval over something that looks close enough to a file system. You could have an MCP server whose sole job is consuming resources from another MCP server, embedding them in some reasonable vector thing, and then exposing vector tools on top of that. And that MCP server doesn't own any data. It's acting sort of like an intelligent proxy. And that's the sort of like composable thing that I'm really excited to start seeing.
And it's so interesting because when Joss and I around this time last year sit down, we're like, shit, we need something for RAG. I'm like, resources solve this. And then it's still a year later and you don't barely see this. And I'm like, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, actually on that note, I was looking just earlier, the MCP client support matrix, like basically everyone supports tools.
Right.
And a big handful of people support resources. Sampling is this big gap. Like I think there's some things in the spec that we need to think more through there, but I'm also very excited for that because it gets to this like agentic idea where there's a symmetry here, where your server needs sampling from the client as well.
And then you have these like complex graphs. You can build these complex graphs of MCP server client combinations where everyone uses the model, but the arbiter of the model is still that one client at the very top of the root. And I think it's just like, I think that's a cool concept that people can explore, and I think there's lots to do still there.
I'll say sampling is the feature that I got most excited about. And FastMCP 2's first feature was sampling support, and nobody used it.
We still do need to fix it. It still does not allow you to give add tools that you provide only for the sampling call and a bunch of other things.
Well, we even implemented a sampling fallback now, so that if the client doesn't support it, the server can actually generate it itself.
Oh, that's really cool.
Because we're just if I can offer one, I don't know if I can say like not strictly positive things up here, but I think the biggest risk right now to MCP is client support of the full suite of functionality. And I think that I look at that client matrix often, and I worry that it's just a green line down tools. And I think maybe an ask for everyone who's here, who's a developer, if we can lean on the client side. I think the servers are doing great. Servers are doing crazy cool stuff, but they're never going to do it if the clients don't support it. And if we can lean on our clients a little bit, and there are some out there that are doing an amazing job, if we can lean on them a little bit for more support, I think it really becomes exciting.
I'll be also very non-creative and repeat my answer from earlier in the sense that people forget that the MCP spec is the min bar for universal adoption. When you talk to customers that are like in specific fields and like, oh, you know what, man, like I'm trying to build this in a super high security environment and I need to use like MTLS certs and like, can we push this in the spec? And like, no, but you can absolutely build it and still be kind of faithful to the interpretation of MCP and how it works behind the scenes, right? It is not going to work in Claude as a client because you have a very specific niche, but you will also be building the client. So it doesn't matter. You can extend it.
Yeah, if you control both client and server, you can do whatever you want. Like you can even add new like verbs and whatever you want, and choose your favorite transport, shove it over gRPC if you like gRPC so much.
Yeah, I like
hope not.
gRPC. I was going to say like that. Your idea of fast MCP of like a sampling fallback, the same thing works with a gateway. You could imagine building an MCP server that all it does is provide sampling support to an underlying MCP server. Or like if there's some enterprise API gateway, it could provide sampling to all of them. Like there's a lot of opportunity here that the spec's sort of like what we think works, and we need to see lots of examples to guide it in future.
Yeah, back to the historic bit, one of the interesting bits here is like prompts. Nobody really supports prompts on the client side. It was literally the first client we ever wrote was the only thing it supported was prompts, and because we needed it at the time. And it's quite interesting to see, like a year later, all open source things or any other client in the industry has not really supported it, or very few do. Where we found like this was like one of the most important things in the beginning, and it's quite sad that to see that sometimes, but win some, lose some.
So I gotta say, I love how I ask a question and then you all talk 10 minutes to each other. I feel like
We're so sorry.
No, it's great. I feel like that's how I imagine it is when you all go and get dinner together. So I love seeing this interaction happening. It's very inspiring, and it's obvious that you're so passionate about the topic. We have maybe 2 questions left. I think Jeremiah, you feel like having some spicy answers. So I'm gonna ask maybe like a bit of a. I'm wondering, were there any like big debates in the community or in the steering community that you feel like it really sparked big like opinions that were very contradictory? And how do you have an example, or how did you solve that?
Transports. It's 100% transports.
It's transport. But the funny part about transport is it's always controversial. It was even controversial inside Anthropic when we talked about transports. So it's just the history since like basically January this year, and first internally and now externally, that it's just like a very controversial topic, because I think there's an open question there. So what people are trying to solve and eventually is like a few things. The first one is MCP is inherently stateful, which has reasons. And I think that can make things very difficult. And so people ask, rightfully, the question is like, why is this not just rest? I think that's one instance of this type of problem. Other things are, we have this streamable HTTP transport, but we would also love to do WebSocket, gRPC, and other things. And we would love to do, random favorite transport. And I think there's also good reasons as to why people want to do this. And so there's this constant question around like statefulness and like proliferation of transports that has been always debated widely because it solves a certain issue for certain people, but yet it adds to a different problem like space that I'm somewhat not super willing to compromise that much, or have principles in mind that I feel overrule some of the concerns that people have.
One thing on that as well is sort of on the earlier discussion about like how do you write good MCP tool descriptions so you're not just regurgitating an API. Sometimes people come to the MCP spec with a desire to regurgitate APIs. Like, yes, if the transports were all stateless and all HTTP, it would be extremely easy to convert any open API spec or RESTful API to MCP, but you'd miss some of the intent and that magic of it that's coming to it.
Yeah, please don't do that anymore. Like,
yeah. So, yeah.
I had to write a blog post telling people, I wrote a feature that converts OpenAPI specs to MCP servers, and I had to write a blog post asking people to stop using it because we were full of issues that were related to context bloat, tools that weren't behaving properly. It's just a bad way to build an MCP server. It's easier to start from scratch.
Okay, so if somebody here already has an MCP server that is built on top of their API, what should they do?
I think the first one is like, look at like what are you trying to solve and like what's the actual thing this thing needs to do from first principles, and then I think build for that. I think is one approximate is probably the best way, and then focus on like designing that interface and relying that on the other side is something that that has a form of intelligence that can be very varied in the input. I'll give you an example. Instead of having like a REST API that does variations of search, you might literally just give it an search with SQL tool, and the model is very good at writing SQL statements. And that is a different way of dealing with a similar problem that is more composable in a way because the model is freely able to write things. I think that's one aspect. But even if you go as far as saying, okay, here's a list my API endpoints and call an API endpoint and have two tools that do exactly only that, that's probably still even better for the model because you have on the other side something that can react on that. And I think that's where the big difference is that you're not in a deterministic system anymore and you are dealing with an AI model. And I think designing for that, I think, is key here.
Yeah, I think it's actually very similar to the same advice as always, which is remember your target market, I guess. Yeah. Which is like when you're writing APIs, you're writing for like a data interchange system, or maybe you're writing for an application developer or whatever. But now you're writing for an agent or a model. And like it's a different target market. It behaves inherently differently, and you need to deal with it just as if it was a new type of customer, I guess.
Yeah, you're essentially shifting from action to intent. Like what if somebody's using the MCP server inside a client, what are they trying to do? Like if you're PayPal or any like payments provider, are they trying to pay a bill or are they trying to list transactions? Like focus on the exact specifics on intent rather than, oh, we have 300 API endpoints, how do we package them as tools?
Got it. So we're going back to what's the problem you're trying to solve. Got it. Noted.
It's shocking, but we are there.
Who knew, right? All right, maybe last question in closing. I'm curious, what is something that you're really looking forward to, either in kind of next step in the protocol or in the agentic space overall?
Can I have a cheesy answer to this?
Always.
Working with these guys. Like, no, like really, like this is one of those things where I feel like there's a lot of stuff that if you look at the backlog for MCP, like there's a lot of things that are planned, a lot of things that are up for debate. Like we're meeting tomorrow to talk about long-running operations, which is going to be exciting. But ultimately, as long as we have kind of the community on board and they understand like why we're doing this, I think the future is bright.
I think for me, what I'm most excited is that we're hopefully have somewhat successfully laid the foundation for open standards in the industry, which I'm very excited about. I've done open source since 20 years. I love this, and I think it adds a lot. And I would love to live in a world where there are open standards for agentic systems and not where it's all proprietary. And so I think I'm very excited about that. I'm also excited about just like, the next steps like long-running operations and some of these things that are coming down the line with MCP.
I think I'm mostly excited about something we haven't seen much of yet, which is more clients. Mm-hmm. So like I feel like this audience is obviously slightly focused, but like MCP is very big on developers. Like we have a lot of agentic workflows for enterprise or highly technical use cases. And these are like a prime concern in front of mind for everyone. But like mass at scale consumer MCP devices, alternate clients like that, like inherently we believe MCP is useful for connecting models to tools and resources and all this. But we don't actually see a lot of like the non-tech persons winning from MCP. I would actually, well, no, I was going to say I guess. I'm extremely confident that if you're not in tech, you have no idea what MCP is. I look forward to that changing.
Yeah, I'll echo that. I think that before MCP becomes a widespread consumer-facing thing, it's going to transform inside enterprises and inside organizations, how non-technical users can interact with technical systems. And I think it's going to fulfill, in our space, the promise of the self-serve analytics and self-serve data platform that never quite captured the complexity it needed to. And so I'm most excited about seeing this context layer emerge that anyone in an organization can subscribe to and impact the business through, which is powered again by this like understandable, known, beautiful little programmatic island inside the agentic space.
That's amazing, and I feel like you gave the perfect answer, because in the next panel we do have Angie from Block, where I think they're doing a lot of these things inside Block, so I'm sure she's going to have a lot of insights there. Thank you so much. This was such a privilege to listen to you, and I think we all learned a lot. Thank you.